Hi guys! Welcome to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Rachelle. Today I am back with another book video, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you all the books I read in the month of July. I'm so excited to share with you my July wrap up because I feel like this is the month where I read the most in 2023, and for the most part I've actually enjoyed every single book I read this month, which rarely happens because I usually have a couple where I didn't like as much. I guess I was just very lucky to have some very good picks. Yeah, so I'm so excited to share with you all the books I read last month and my thoughts on them. Without further ado, let's just get into my July wrap up. So for the month of July, I read 8 books, and I know maybe for some of you that's not that many books to read in a month, but for me that's actually a lot because I usually read around 4 books a month. So in the month of July, I actually read double what I usually read. But the first book I read in the month of July is Yellowface. This is a literary fiction novel, and it's the first novel I read by this author. She wrote The Poppy War and Babel, I think, books I potentially want to read in the future. But going back to Yellowface, this book is about a young author named June, and you can pretty much call her untalented in her craft. She's friends with this Asian American author named Athena who happens to be very talented. One day when they are hanging out, Athena happens to choke to death and June actually witnesses it. Upon Athena's death, June ends up stealing Athena's latest manuscript. She then makes some rewrites and then publishes it as her own novel. However, after the release of the book, June faces some challenges because she is a white woman telling a Chinese story. And of course, she also deals with the struggles of a stolen story. This book, Yellowface, covers themes of diversity, racism, and cultural appropriation in the publishing world. Before reading this book, I actually didn't even know that much about the publishing world. So reading this book definitely did give me a little bit of an insight to what that world is like, and I liked that factor a lot. I also really liked the pacing of this book. It was quite fast, but I just thought it was perfect. I just couldn't imagine what this book would be like if it was written slower and the timeline of these events were stretched out. The one thing I found frustrating about this book was June's voice. I just think June is such an insufferable character, and I know it's the whole point of this book, but at times I did get a bit annoyed because she would be so obsessed with fame and her image, and she just couldn't leave things as it is. For example, as an author, I'm sure you're bound to get negative reviews, but when June got a negative review, she would always fixate on those negative reviews and she just couldn't let it go. Overall, I did enjoy reading this book though. It was entertaining, so I gave this book 3.75 stars. The next book I read is I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jennette McCurdy. This is of course Jennette McCurdy's memoir. This book has actually been a book I've been wanting to read for a while because I grew up watching Jennette McCurdy on TV, so I am so happy I finally read it, and it really did not disappoint me. In her memoir, Jennette talks about growing up as an actor, her eating disorders, and all the abuse she experienced in her life. She recounts all of these struggles and events with a lot of detail. I absolutely love reading every single page of this book. Jennette's story was so sad to read. She basically put her mom on a pedestal and did everything her mom wanted her to do. And she sacrificed her own happiness for the sake of pleasing her mom, which of course eventually led to all the issues she had, but she didn't even realize that she was harming herself in the process. Reading Jennette's story, I found myself able to relate to her in some ways because I was a people pleaser growing up. I could understand where she was coming from and all the choices she made. I was also quite shocked when she emphasized how much she hated acting. Just watching her on screen and her dedication to her craft, how she did so many seasons of iCarly and then continued on to do a spin-off show, Sam and Cat, and all her other notable acting credits. Her hating acting was literally the last thing I would expect. And while reading her story, it reminded me a very important lesson that there is so much more to a person than what you see superficially, especially for public figures because you actually don't know anything about them by what you see and hear and read online. I also just learned a lot about the entertainment industry from reading this book. I learned about the pros and cons to the entertainment industry and how toxic it can be. If you guys have been around my channel for a while, you might know that I work in the entertainment industry, but I work on the crew side instead of the actor side. I've always had some basic knowledge about the actor side of things, but I didn't know everything. So this book was just very informative for me because I got to learn what it's like to work on these sets as an actor and just all the challenges and struggles they encounter along the way with this line of work. Overall, this memoir was absolute perfection. Jennette McCurdy's voice was so powerful, so I rated this book 5 stars. The next book I read this month is The Fine Print. This is a romance novel and it follows Rowan Kane and Zara. Rowan is assigned with the task to become the director of Dreamland, which is an amusement park, and he has to take on this job for 6 months. And within his 6 months, he has to create a special project to improve the park, and this was in his grandfather's will. if Rowan succeeds, he will officially receive his shares of the Kane Company. Zara is an employee of Dreamland, and after submitting a drunk proposal criticizing Dreamland's most expensive ride, she was offered a job as a creator at Dreamland, which is how she finds herself becoming acquainted with Rowan. However, things get out of control when Rowan ends up kissing Zara. This novel fits into the Grumpy Ex Sunshine trope. It is also a workplace romance, and it is also a dual POV romance novel. What I'm about to say next is for sure going to be an unpopular opinion, but I cannot lie. I must tell the truth, and the truth is I didn't really like this book. As much as I wanted to love it, I just couldn't. And I kind of had to force myself to finish reading the book. I feel like in a romance, it is so important for me to feel the chemistry, to believe that it exists between the couple. But in this book, I didn't feel the chemistry at all. Instead, it just felt like the writing was telling me that there was chemistry and a connection between the couple, when actually it was just lust. I also didn't really believe there was chemistry because the placement of the romantic elements in this story was just weird. Rowan and Zara went from 0 to 100 within the first quarter of the book because they kissed and all, and then it just went from 100 back to 0 because nothing romantic happened for like 40% of the book, and then it went straight back up to 100% all of a sudden because they slept together. To me, that felt more like lust than a slow burn romance. This book was not supposed to be a slow burn romance, but it felt like an extremely slow read for me because I was just not invested in the story. And I found myself wanting to DNF the book so many times, and I just had to keep convincing myself not to quit and just push myself to continue reading. So I ended up giving this book 2 stars. The next book I read is the Hawthorne Legacy. This is a young adult mystery novel, and it is a second book in the Inheritance game series. This book picks up right after where it left off in the first book, still deep in the space of riddles, danger, and family secrets. Avery is on the hunt to find the one person that may hold all the answers to her questions, including the real reason to why billionaire Tobias Hawthorne left his entire fortune to her. In this story, we see Avery work through puzzle after puzzle, stopping at nothing until she gets the answer she's looking for. Comparing this book to the first book in the series, the plot thickens, it's more exhilarating, and we get to see the development of the characters and their relationships are more fleshed out. All of that being said, I definitely enjoyed reading this book more than the first book. I did enjoy the first book, but in this one, it just felt more exciting and exhilarating because the stakes were higher. I remember in my June wrap-up when I read the first book, I said that there wasn't much romance in that book, even though a lot of other people talked about there being romance in their own reviews. I still stand by my statement where I said there wasn't much romance in the first book, but I'm glad to see the romance subplot grow in this book. Avery and the 2 Hawthorne brothers, Jameson and Grayson, I don't know who I ship Avery with more. The dynamic Avery has with both of them is just so cute. Also, I cannot forget, just like the Inheritance games, this book has very short chapters, and the pacing of the story is really fast, and I definitely think those 2 elements make this the perfect mystery. I don't know about you, but a mystery with long chapters and it reads really slow too, I just feel like it loses the energy and the determination to keep reading for more answers. Overall though, I did enjoy reading this book, so I gave it 4 stars. The next book I read was Little Fires Everywhere. This is a literary fiction novel, and the story is set in Shaker Heights, a suburb of Cleveland where everything is planned. And by everything, I mean the layout of the roads, to the color of the houses and the lives the residents will live. And no one embodies that energy more than Elena Richardson. Elena is someone who plays by the rules. With her, there's clearly a right and wrong. Elena Richardson, her husband, and her 4 children are quite wealthy. They live in a decently big house, and they also own a secondary house, which is a rental property. In this rental property, their new tenants are Mia Warren, who is an artist, and her daughter Pearl. Soon after they move in, Mia and Pearl become more than just tenants, because for some reason the 4 Richardson children are drawn to them. But Mia carries with her a mysterious past and a disregard for status quo, which threatens to upend this carefully ordered community, and of course that happens to bother Elena. When an old family friend of the Richardsons plan to adopt a Chinese baby, a custody battle erupts and it divides the entire town, putting Elena and Mia on opposite ends. Elena then becomes suspicious of Mia's motives and decides to uncover Mia's past. However, her obsession and determination to uncover Mia's past will come at an unexpected and devastating cost. I've had this book sitting on my shelf for like 2 years now. I bought this book right after I watched the show because I absolutely loved the show. However, I never picked it up because I just never felt ready to read it. When I bought this book, I just had a feeling that the writing style would be very different from what I usually read, and therefore I wouldn't like this book that much. So I just kept holding on to this book, and then I finally picked it up last month. And thinking about it now, after I read it, I'm so glad I waited to read it because I was right. Reading this book last month, I really enjoyed it, and I know for a fact that I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much as I did 2 years ago. I know I wouldn't like the writing style of this book 2 years ago, and I know I just would have found it a difficult read. All of that being said, I definitely think this book was written so well. The way Celeste describes the difference of family dynamics, the tensions, and all the themes is so clear. In this book, I really enjoyed reading about the gap between the privileged white upper class and the people of color in the working class. It was very subtle and not in your face at all, and so I gave this book 4 stars. The next book I read is We Were Dreamers, an immigrant superhero origin story. This is Simu Liu's memoir. I actually didn't read the physical copy of this book. I listened to the audiobook, and I must say I highly recommend the audiobook. The way Simu narrated his life story was absolute perfection. When I was listening to the audiobook, I could just feel his energy, and his voice was just so raw and captivating. There was not one point where I felt bored and I started to zone out. In this memoir, Simu describes his journey from birth all the way to how he got his role as Shang-Chi in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He talks about his childhood days in China, when he immigrated to Canada as a child, his teenager years going to university, getting a job as an accountant, and then how he switched careers to become an actor. And he also tells us about the ups and downs he had before landing Shang-Chi. I found this book so relatable because me also being Chinese Canadian, I could 100% relate to how he grew up being raised by Asian parents, how they expect nothing but the best from us, and how much pressure we have on our shoulders to live up to that. I could also understand how he felt being the first generation of Chinese Canadians in his family, how we feel different from our parents because we were raised in the same manner as the Chinese, but in a completely different environment, and in this case, Canada. And of course, Canada has its own lifestyles and cultures that are so different from the Chinese. I could also relate to his struggles as an actor. As I mentioned earlier, I work in the film industry, but on the crew side of things. While being a crew member is different from being an actor, they both have one thing in common, and that is they are both freelance careers. I could understand the struggles he had and establishing his name because it's what I'm currently experiencing myself. Once I finish a project, I'm always looking for another, and you're only as good as your last project. Yeah, so I really enjoyed this book because of how much I could relate to Simu's story, so I gave this book 4.5 stars. The next book I read this month is Fourth Wing. This is a fantasy novel with some romance in it. This book follows Violet, who has trained her entire life to enter the scribe quadrant. Scribes are basically people who live a quiet life among books and history. However, her mother, also known as the commanding general, has forced her to enter the writer's quadrant and become a dragon rider. The only problem is Violet is small and she doesn't have a body build that bonds well with dragons. With fewer dragons willing to bond than cadets, most would kill Violet to increase their chances of success. The rest would kill her for just being her mother's daughter, like Xaden, who is a powerful, ruthless wing leader in the Rider's Quadrant. In this book, we see Violet enter the Rider's Quadrant and train to be a dragon rider, but with every day that passes, the war outside grows more deadly and Violet begins to suspect that leadership is hiding a terrible secret. This book was absolute perfection in my opinion. It was so addictive and definitely a page turner. I love this book so much, it literally lives in my head rent free. The characters and the dragons in this book were so likable. I especially love Violet because she's a strong, independent woman, and I seriously just can't get enough of her and her dragon. Together they were so sarcastic and funny. I literally could not contain my emotions while reading their banter. It just made me smile and laugh uncontrollably. The romance in this book was also amazing. It was developed nicely and not rushed at all. The writing of this book was also so easy to digest. One of my worries about reading fantasies is indeed the writing, because sometimes I get scared that there's going to be a ton of world building and I'm just going to get lost in it, but I didn't feel that way at all with this book. There was also a lot of twists and turns in this book and a massive plot twist that I did not expect. I will also say that this book is definitely a combination of Divergent, Hunger Games, and Throne of Glass, so if you like one of those series, I'm sure you will also like this book. I ended up giving this book 5 stars. That's how much I love this book. If you want to hear all my thoughts on this book though, I did make a reading vlog for this book and it's up on my channel, so you should definitely check it out. The last book I read this month is Cersei. This is a fantasy Greek mythology novel. This book follows Cersei, who is the daughter of Helios, who happens to be the god of sun. Unfortunately though, Cersei is neither powerful like her father or viciously alluring like her mother. Because she doesn't really fit in with her family, she turns to the world of mortals for companion. companionship. But by doing so, she actually learns that she does have powers. She has the power of witchcraft and she can turn her rivals into monsters. Although her powers threaten the gods themselves, including Zeus. So Zeus ends up banishing Cersei to a deserted island. While on this island, Cersei practices her witchcraft and she crosses paths with many famous figures in all of Greek mythology. But there is also danger for a woman who stands alone, and she draws the wrath of both men and gods. I'm not gonna lie, this book might be one of my least favorite reads in July. It was kind of a letdown for me because I went into this book having high hopes that I would like it after reading Madeline Miller's other book, The Song of Achilles, which I enjoyed a lot. I know a lot of people like this book, but I just didn't feel the same way because I realized Greek mythology just isn't for me. And you guys might ask, Rachelle, you enjoyed The Song of Achilles, which is indeed Greek mythology as well. Well, the way I see it, The Song of Achilles is kind of an exception for me because I see that book as a very powerful love story and I was there for the romance. I'm not saying this book was horrible or anything. The writing was great and I enjoyed it enough to finish reading the book. But besides Greek mythology not being my thing, I didn't find the story gripping in any way. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Okay, so those are all the books I read in the month of July. It's a total of 8 books. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about the books I read last month and my thoughts on them. Besides having a couple outliers, I had a really good reading month. Of course, there were so many great reads and I did read a lot as well. If you guys have read any of these books, definitely let me know your thoughts on them in the comments down below. I would love to hear what you guys think. If you guys like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel while you're at it. And if you want to stay up to date with what I'm reading or what I'm doing when I'm not making videos, definitely follow me on Goodreads and all of my social media platforms. I will have all the links to my accounts in the description box below. And I guess with that, I will see you guys in my next video. Bye!
Pull the key out the ignition. Run your mouth but I never listen. You hold me back, will never last. Keep talking all your shit. Wondering how all this started. You left me broken hearted. You flip my words, yeah, this love hurts. Keep talking all your shit.